I remember that night as if it were burned into my skin. The laughter, the glasses clinking, the smell of expensive wine, and the sound of my husband's voice, mocking, loud, and cruel. It was supposed to be a celebration. Our 10th wedding anniversary. He had invited a few of his business friends to dinner at the country club. I had spent the whole day preparing, trying on dresses, fixing my hair, convincing myself that maybe tonight he'd look at me the way he used to. That maybe he'd see the woman who once made his heart race. But he didn't. He barely looked at me. The evening started like any other gathering of his. Men in crisp suits talking about deals and money, women with painted smiles and champagne flutes whispering about handbags and vacations. I sat beside him, smiling politely, adding a small laugh when the men made jokes I didn't understand. He had been drinking, one glass too many, maybe two. And when he laughed that loud, careless laugh, I knew it was the kind of laugh that came before trouble. "Gentlemen," he said, rising from his chair and lifting his glass, "I have an offer for you tonight." The men turned their attention to him, some chuckling, expecting another of his wild stories. I felt a twist in my stomach. His tone was playful, but there was something sharp beneath it. He looked at me, his eyes glassy with alcohol, his lips curling into that half-smile he wore when he wanted to humiliate me. And then he said it. "Gentlemen," he repeated, louder this time, "$1 for a dinner with my boring wife." For a moment, silence hung in the air. And then it came. Laughter, loud, harsh, ugly laughter that echoed off the walls. I froze. Every muscle in my body went stiff. It felt like someone had poured ice water into my veins. $1. For me. For a dinner with his boring wife. I wanted to disappear. The laughter bounced around me like sharp stones, each one cutting a little deeper. My cheeks burned. My throat tightened. I forced a smile, though I could feel it trembling. My hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles turned white. He was still laughing, actually laughing, as if it were the funniest thing he'd ever said. I looked around the table. Some of the men looked embarrassed, others amused. Their wives avoided my eyes. One woman bit her lip, whispering to her husband. And then someone, a man I didn't even know, pulled out $1 from his wallet and waved it in the air. $1 it is, he said. I'll take the lady out. The table roared again. Even my husband laughed harder, slapping the man's shoulder. "Deal," he shouted. "She's all yours, buddy." They thought it was a joke. But to me, it was the cruelest truth I'd ever heard. I sat there, trying to keep my face calm, my smile in place. But inside, something cracked, something I didn't know could break any further. I had given this man everything. I had stood by him when he was broke, when we ate canned soup for dinner, when I worked double shifts so he could start his business. I believed in him when no one else did. And this was what I got in return. A boring wife worth $1. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I excused myself quietly, pretending to need the restroom. My voice came out small but steady. No one noticed. They were too busy laughing. As soon as I reached the hallway, I exhaled the breath I'd been holding. The music from the dining room faded, replaced by the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor. My legs felt weak, my stomach heavy. I pushed open the door to the ladies' room and gripped the counter, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Who was this woman staring back at me? Perfect makeup, perfect hair, perfect dress, yet I looked hollow. My eyes were wide, glassy, empty. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, my breath shaky. Then, without meaning to, I laughed, a small, bitter laugh. Because it was ridiculous, wasn't it? To spend years trying to be the perfect wife, patient, gentle, understanding, only to become a punchline in front of strangers. I thought about the woman I used to be, the girl who dreamed of writing, of traveling, of building something of her own. She had vanished somewhere between paying bills and cooking dinners, between holding her tongue and swallowing her pride. I had traded my fire for peace, my dreams for his comfort. And tonight, he sold my dignity for $1. A tear rolled down my cheek, smearing my mascara. I wiped it away quickly, afraid someone might walk in. But no one did. No one came looking for me. Of course not. I took a deep breath and whispered to my reflection, "No more." It came out weak at first, like a secret I was afraid to tell. Then I said it again, louder, stronger. "No more." And for the first time in years, I believed myself. When I walked back to the table, the laughter had died down. The plates were half empty, glasses refilled. My husband barely glanced at me. "You okay?" he muttered, his voice thick with alcohol. "I'm fine," I said quietly. I smiled again, this time not because I was pretending, but because I knew something he didn't. He thought he had won, that I'd forget, forgive, and move on like I always did. But something inside me had changed. A seed had been planted. I watched him talk to his friends, boasting about his business, about his success, about the new car he wanted to buy. I looked at him, not as my husband, but as a stranger. A stranger who didn't deserve me. For the rest of the dinner, I barely spoke. I watched. I listened. I memorized every word, every laugh, every sneer, not out of pain, but out of clarity. Because I knew, deep down, this would be the last time I ever sat quietly beside him while he made me small. When the night ended, we drove home in silence. The city lights flickered through the car window, flashing across his face. He hummed a tune, oblivious. I stared out the window, watching the blur of lights fade into darkness. Inside, my mind was a storm. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to ask why. Why humiliate me? Why turn me into a joke? Why destroy something that was once beautiful? But another part of me stayed quiet, calm, cold. Because I knew words wouldn't change him. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. When we pulled into the driveway, he yawned and stumbled out of the car. "You were quiet tonight," he said lazily. "Don't be mad, babe, it was just a joke." A joke? I looked at him standing under the porch light, his tie loosened, his eyes heavy with drink, his grin smug. And I realized something powerful. He wasn't my world anymore. He was just the wall I had to climb over to reach it. That night, while he slept soundly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The words replayed in my head again and again. $1 for a dinner with my boring wife. But this time, instead of breaking me, they built something inside me, a quiet, burning resolve. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But I knew this was the beginning of something new. A different story. My story. And when I finally closed my eyes, I wasn't the same woman who walked into that dinner. I was someone else. Someone stronger. Someone ready to rise. I woke up the next morning with the sound of birds outside the window, but their song felt strange to me. It was too cheerful for the kind of silence that filled our room. The sun slipped through the curtains, soft and golden, but even that light couldn't touch the cold inside me. He was still asleep beside me, my husband. His arm flung lazily across the bed, his face peaceful, lips slightly parted. He looked innocent. And for a moment, I almost hated him for it. Because I couldn't stop seeing his face from last night, laughing, mocking, proud of his cruelty. The sound of his voice still echoed in my head. "Gentlemen, $1 for a dinner with my boring wife." I turned away from him. I couldn't look at the man who had turned me into a joke. I sat up quietly, careful not to wake him. My chest felt tight, my eyes sore. I had cried in my sleep, I could tell. My pillow was damp, but I didn't want to cry anymore. Not one more tear for a man who saw me as worthless. I swung my legs out of bed and stood by the window. The morning air was cool, but my thoughts were burning. I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered, "What happened to you, Anna?" That's my name, Anna. A name that once belonged to a woman with dreams. When I was younger, I had plans. I wanted to open a small bakery. I loved baking. It made me feel peaceful, creative, alive. I used to imagine a cozy shop with warm lights and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. But after I married him, everything changed. He said it was a sweet idea, but not practical. "You'll see," he told me. "When my business grows, we'll have everything. You won't need to work." So I stopped trying. I stayed home. I cooked, cleaned, supported him through every struggle. I believed that one day, when life became easier, he'd remember my dreams. He never did. And now, 10 years later, I was nothing more than a boring wife. I walked to the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, hair messy, eyes red. But there was something different about the way I looked at myself that morning. There was a strange calm beneath the pain. I thought about the way he laughed, the way those men looked at me like I was some toy being sold at a garage sale. I felt small last night. But this morning, I felt something else, anger. A quiet, sharp anger that sat deep in my chest. I whispered to my reflection again, no more. It sounded stronger this time. When he finally woke up, he stretched and yawned as if the night before had never happened. "Morning," he said, rubbing his eyes. "What's for breakfast?" I looked at him, speechless for a moment. He didn't even remember, or worse, he did, and he didn't care. "I haven't made anything yet," I said softly. He frowned, sitting up. "You okay? You look weird." I wanted to laugh. Weird. No, I was broken. I was humiliated. I was furious. But I just said, "I'm fine." He shrugged. "Good, because we've got a dinner again tonight. Don't make it awkward like last time, okay? You were too quiet." Too quiet. He didn't know silence could be louder than any scream. I turned away, pretending to tidy the dresser. My hands were shaking, but not from fear this time, from decision. That was the moment I knew I was done. The rest of the day went by like a blur. He left for work. I cleaned the house, but my mind wasn't there. Every sound, every movement felt like it was happening far away. My thoughts were racing, wild and clear all at once. I thought about my mother's voice, from years ago. "Never lose yourself in love, Anna. Love him, but never forget who you are." I had forgot completely. I thought about the times I'd stayed silent to keep peace. The arguments I'd avoided, the insults I'd ignored. The way I'd smiled through his coldness, telling myself it's just a phase. But it wasn't a phase. It was a pattern. And last night proved it wasn't going to change. Around noon, I sat down with my old notebook. It was the one I used to write my bakery ideas in. I hadn't touched it in years. It was dusty, the pages slightly yellow, but as soon as I opened it, I could feel my heart stir. Inside were sketches of cake designs, recipe notes, even names for my future shop. Sweet Rise Bakery, I had written in neat handwriting. I smiled at the name. It sounded hopeful, like the person I used to be. I ran my fingers over the pages and whispered, "I want her back." I didn't know how, but I knew I needed to start living again, not just existing. That thought gave me a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. When he came home that evening, he was cheerful, loud, full of stories from his office. He didn't notice that I wasn't wearing the necklace he'd given me, or that I wasn't dressed for dinner. "Hey," he said, tossing his jacket on the couch. "You ready to go?" "I'm not going," I said calmly. He stopped mid-step. "What?" I said I'm not going. He frowned as if I had spoken in another language. "Anna, don't start this. I already told them we're coming." "You can go," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm staying home." He stared at me for a moment, his jaw tightening. "You're still upset about last night? For God's sake, it was a joke." "A joke," I repeated softly. "Then why does it still hurt?" He sighed loudly. "You're being dramatic. Stop acting like some victim." Everyone laughed. It wasn't serious. I looked at him carefully, my heart strangely calm. It was serious to me. He rolled his eyes. "You're impossible sometimes." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'm not cruel." That silenced him for a moment. He looked at me with confusion, as if he couldn't recognize me. Maybe he couldn't, because for the first time, I wasn't afraid to stand tall. He muttered something under his breath and left the room. I heard the front door slam a minute later. And just like that, the house was quiet, peaceful. I sat on the couch for a long time after that, staring at the blank wall. But it didn't feel empty, it felt open, like the start of something. That night, I took out a small suitcase from the closet. Not because I was running away in panic, but because I was choosing peace. I folded a few clothes neatly, a few books, my old notebook. Every item I packed felt like a promise to myself. When I zipped the suitcase, I felt tears sting my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. I wasn't leaving out of fear. I was leaving because I was done being small. Before going to bed, I walked into the kitchen and looked around. This house, this life, it was all built around him. Every wall had his taste, every picture his approval. But I realized something important. He could have the house. I would take my soul. I wrote a small note and left it on the kitchen counter. It wasn't long, just a few lines. You broke something last night that can't be fixed. I hope one day you understand what it cost. Don't look for me. Iana. When I went to bed, I didn't sleep. I watched the clock tick through the night. At 5 a.m., I got up, dressed quietly, and carried my suitcase to the door. The sky outside was still dark, painted with early morning blue. The air was cold, sharp against my face, but it felt real, alive. As I stepped out, I took one last look at the house behind me. Then I whispered, goodbye. Not with sadness, not with fear, but with power. Because for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't walking away from someone. I was walking toward myself. And though I didn't know what waited ahead, where I'd go, what I'd do, I knew one thing for sure. I would never be someone's joke again. The morning I left was quiet, too quiet. The world outside still slept, but my heart was wide awake. Every sound felt louder, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, the whisper of my own breathing. I stood by the front door with my suitcase beside me, my hand resting on the handle. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. Leaving wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. 10 years of my life were behind that door, every smile, every tear, every piece of myself I'd given away. I looked around one last time. The hallway where we'd once danced to our favorite song on our wedding anniversary. The kitchen where I had spent countless mornings making breakfast while he scrolled through his phone. The living room with the couch we bought together, where I used to sit waiting for him to come home late from work. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I took a deep breath. It's time, I whispered to myself. And then I opened the door and stepped out. The cold morning air hit my face, sharp and clean. The sky was painted in shades of gray and pale pink. The street was empty, except for a few sleeping cars and a paperboy on his bike. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked toward the train station. Each step felt heavy but freeing. I didn't have a big plan. I didn't have a map or a list or a perfect idea of what came next. All I had was a small suitcase, a few $100s, and a decision I could no longer unmake. As I walked, I kept hearing his voice in my head, his laughter, his mockery, the way he looked at me that night. For a long time, his voice had lived in my mind like a shadow, controlling every choice I made. But that morning, it sounded smaller, distant, like an echo fading in the wind. For once, my own thoughts were louder than his. The station was nearly empty when I arrived. A few sleepy travelers sat on benches, sipping coffee, reading newspapers. I bought a ticket to a city 2 hours away, a place I'd visited only once before, years ago, with my mother. It wasn't far, but it felt far enough to start over. When the train arrived, I found a seat by the window. The suitcase sat beside me, small but full of the only things that mattered. As the train began to move, I watched the town fade away, the houses, the streets, the memories. Each passing minute felt like I was leaving a part of myself behind. It hurt, but it also healed. I didn't cry. Not even once. Maybe I had run out of tears, or maybe I had cried enough for a lifetime. Instead, I watched the fields rush by, golden and endless. The sky began to brighten, and I could feel the warmth of the sun on my face. It was like the world was whispering, "You did it. You're free now." But freedom didn't feel like joy, not yet. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind pushing against you, not knowing whether you'll fall or fly. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't have to answer to anyone. No one was waiting for me. No one was calling my name in anger. No one was expecting me to be anything other than what I already was, just me. And that thought, fragile as it was, gave me strength. When I reached the city, it was busy and alive. The noise was overwhelming at first, the sound of cars, chatter, footsteps on pavement, but it felt good, real, like I had stepped into a world that didn't know my story, my shame, or my past. I walked for hours with my suitcase, searching for a small hotel or room to stay in. Every corner was full of strangers, each person moving fast with purpose. I felt invisible among them, and for once, I liked it. Finally, I found a small room above a bakery. The sign on the window said vacancy. The owner, a kind older woman named Mrs. Lane, looked at me with a warm smile. "You look tired, dear," she said. "Rough morning." I nodded. "You could say that." "Well," she said softly, "you're safe here." Those 3 words nearly broke me. "You're safe here." I thanked her, paid for the week, and carried my suitcase up the narrow stairs. The room was small, a single bed, a wooden desk, a window overlooking the street, but to me, it felt like freedom. I dropped the suitcase and sat on the bed, breathing deeply. The smell of freshly baked bread floated up from the bakery below. It made me smile a little. Maybe it was a sign, a reminder of the dreams I'd buried. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Maybe this is where I start again." The first night alone felt strange. I kept expecting to hear his voice, his footsteps, the sound of his phone buzzing beside the bed. But there was only silence. I thought about calling someone, maybe my mother, maybe an old friend, but I couldn't. Not yet. How could I explain what I'd become? How could I tell them that the woman who seemed to have everything had been living like a ghost? So I just sat there, writing in my old notebook by the dim light of a lamp. I wrote everything I couldn't say out loud. Every memory, every wound, every dream. I wrote about the girl who used to love baking, who believed in love and laughter and new beginnings. And by the time I finished, I realized something beautiful. She wasn't gone. She was still here, under the pain, waiting for me to remember her. The next morning, I woke up early and went downstairs to the bakery. The smell of coffee and bread filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile. Mrs. Lane was there, arranging pastries in the display. "Good morning," I said. She looked up and smiled. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Do you need help?" She blinked in surprise. "Help? Oh, well, I suppose I could use an extra pair of hands." And just like that, I began working in her bakery, washing dishes, wiping tables, learning how to knead dough again. The rhythm of it felt healing, like every roll of the dough was pressing the pain out of me. For the first time in years, I was doing something for myself, something that made me feel alive. Every evening, after the shop closed, I would sit by the window in my small room and watch the sunset paint the city orange and gold. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I knew he'd wake up and find me gone. I knew he'd be angry, confused, maybe even shocked. He'd call me dramatic, tell everyone I was overreacting. But I didn't care. Because I wasn't leaving to make him feel anything. I was leaving to feel something again, for myself. One night, as I watched the lights flicker outside, I opened my notebook again. I turned to the page where I had written years ago, Sweet Rise Bakery. And under it, I wrote one more line. Coming soon. It made me smile. Because that's what I was coming soon. Not the broken wife, not the woman defined by someone else's cruelty, but the woman I was always meant to be. That night, before I went to sleep, I whispered a silent promise to myself. I will never go back to that house. I will never let anyone silence me again. I will build something beautiful out of what was meant to destroy me. And as I drifted to sleep, I didn't dream of him. I dreamed of sunlight, of laughter, of a small shop with the smell of bread filling the air, and a sign above the door that said, Sweet Rise. The days that followed were both terrifying and beautiful. I had stepped out of a life I'd known for 10 years and into something uncertain, fragile, and entirely my own. For the first time, there was no one telling me what to do, what to wear, or who to be. And that freedom, it was strange at first, almost too quiet. But every day, I could feel a small part of me coming back to life. Working at Mrs. Lane's bakery became my lifeline. It wasn't glamorous. I woke up before dawn, tied my hair back, and helped her bake bread and pastries until the smell filled every corner of the shop. My hands were always dusted with flour, my apron always messy. But there was something sacred in it. Something healing. I used to think I was ordinary, invisible even. But when I saw customers smile at a loaf I helped bake, or when a child laughed because of the powdered sugar on his nose, I felt like I mattered again. Every loaf that rose in the oven felt like a small victory. Every happy customer was proof that I was capable of more than just enduring pain. Mrs. Lane noticed how quickly I learned. You've got a natural touch, Anna. she said one morning as I carefully shaped dough into rolls. "You remind me of myself when I first started." I smiled shyly. "It's something I've always loved, I just forgot for a while." She nodded knowingly. Life has a way of making us forget who we are, but the good news is we can always remember. Her words stayed with me all day. At night, when the bakery closed and the city grew quiet, I sat by my window and wrote in my notebook. I listed recipes, sketched designs for a shop, and scribbled small goals. Save money. Learn business basics. Find a small space. Some days I doubted myself. Who was I to dream again? I had no degree, no business experience, no one to help me. But then I'd remember where I had been and realize I had already survived worse. Failure didn't scare me anymore. Staying small did. About a month later, I received my first paycheck. It wasn't much, but holding that envelope in my hands felt like gold. It was mine. I hadn't earned anything for myself in years, and now this money carried meaning beyond value. It was proof of my strength. That evening, I treated myself to a small meal at a nearby cafe. I sat by the window, watching the people pass by, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel envy or sadness. I felt proud. I wasn't anyone's wife. I wasn't anyone's joke. I was Anna, a woman learning to stand again. Still, there were nights when the past came crawling back. Sometimes I'd wake up in a sweat, hearing his voice in my dreams, mocking me all over again. Sometimes I'd wonder if he had even noticed I was gone. I didn't check my phone for messages. I didn't want to know. If he cared, he'd find a way to say it. If he didn't, it didn't matter anymore. One night, curiosity won. I opened my old phone, half expecting silence. There were messages. Dozens of them. At first, they were angry. "You're being ridiculous. You think you can just walk out." Then they turned desperate. "Come home, Anna. Let's talk. I'm sorry, okay? Just come back." And finally, cold. "If you think you can survive without me, good luck." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I deleted everything. I didn't need his voice in my world anymore. Weeks turned into months. The bakery became busier, and Mrs. Lane started trusting me with more work. I learned to make cakes, croissants, even fancy desserts that intimidated me at first. One day, she handed me the keys and said, "You're ready to open the shop tomorrow morning. I'm taking a day off." I froze, me alone. She smiled, "You'll do great, trust yourself, Anna." The next morning, I opened the bakery with trembling hands. But as customers walked in, I found my rhythm. The smell of bread, the laughter, the sound of coins in the register, it all felt right. When the last customer left that day, I locked the door and cried. Not from fear or pain, but from pride. I had done it, alone. Later that week, Mrs. Lane sat me down with a cup of tea. "You've got potential," she said. "Have you ever thought about opening your own place someday?" My heart skipped, all the time, but it's just a dream. She leaned forward. "Dreams are just plans waiting for courage." Those words changed me. That night, I stayed up late, writing again. I looked at the name on the first page of my notebook, Sweet Rise Bakery. And for the first time, I didn't just see a dream, I saw a future. The next few months were a blur of work, saving, and learning. I spent hours reading about business management at the library. I watched online tutorials about branding and marketing. I talked to local shop owners who gave me advice. I worked extra shifts, sometimes until my feet ached and my hands throbbed, but every ache felt worth it. Because I was building something with purpose this time, not for anyone else, but for myself. One evening, while cleaning up, Mrs. Lane handed me a small brown envelope. "What's this?" I asked. She smiled, "An early birthday gift." Inside was a small check. I gasped. "Mrs. Lane, I can't." She waved her hand. "You can, use it for your dream, you've earned it." Tears filled my eyes. I don't know what to say. "Say thank you by doing something great," she said. With her support, I found a small space for rent just 3 blocks away. It was tiny, old, and needed a lot of work, but when I stepped inside, I saw it. My bakery, my new beginning. The walls were cracked, the floor uneven, but I didn't see flaws. I saw potential. I spent every spare hour cleaning, painting, fixing shelves. Some nights I fell asleep on the floor, too tired to move. But every morning I woke up with purpose. Finally, after months of saving and planning, Sweet Rise Bakery opened its doors. The morning of the opening, I stood outside, staring at the sign above the door. My name wasn't on it, but my soul was in every inch of that place. When the first customer walked in, I greeted them with a smile that came from deep within me. "Good morning," I said. "Welcome to Sweet Rise." The days that followed were magical. People loved the bread, the warmth, the atmosphere. Word spread quickly. A local newspaper even wrote a short article about the small bakery with the big heart. Every time someone complimented my work, I thought of the woman who once sat in silence while her husband laughed at her. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and finally free. One evening, as I closed the shop, I looked out at the sunset painting the street gold. My reflection shone faintly on the glass door, and for the first time in years, I recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired, yes, but also proud. Alive. And I smiled, whispering to the wind, "You were wrong about me. I wasn't boring. I wasn't weak. I was becoming unstoppable." That night, I walked home with flowers still on my hands and a heart full of gratitude. I had rebuilt myself from ashes, not into what I was, but into who I was meant to be. And though I knew challenges would come, I was no longer afraid of falling. Because now I knew I could rise. I still remember the first morning, the bakery sold out. The line stretched out the door, people chatting, laughing, taking pictures of their croissants and coffee cups. I stood behind the counter with flour on my cheek and my heart racing, barely believing what I was seeing. "Congratulations, Anna," Mrs. Lane said, smiling proudly as she handed me a tray of fresh muffins. "You've made it." But I didn't feel like I'd made it. Not yet. Because deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Owning Sweet Rise Bakery changed everything. It wasn't just a business, it was my redemption. Every loaf I baked, every customer I served, every smile I received, it all reminded me that I had rebuilt myself from the ground up. But success didn't come easy. There were nights when I stayed up past midnight, balancing receipts, cleaning ovens, worrying about rent. Some mornings, I would wake up exhausted, hands sore, back aching. But when I saw the sign outside the door, I felt alive again. This was mine. Not his. Not anyone else. Mine. Sometimes, I would catch myself thinking about him. Not with love, not even with anger, just curiosity. Did he ever wonder where I went? Did he regret anything? A few months after the bakery opened, I received a letter. The handwriting was familiar before I even looked at the name. My heart jumped, but I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the counter and stared at it for a long time. Finally, I tore it open. "Anna, I heard you opened a bakery. Someone sent me a photo. I can't believe it. You always said you wanted that, didn't you? I guess I should say congratulations. I also wanted to say I'm sorry for that night. I was drunk. It was stupid. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you hurt me too, you just left. No goodbye. Anyway, if you ever want to talk, you know where to find me. Mark." I read it twice. Then I laughed softly, not bitterly, but with the kind of laugh that comes when you realize you've healed. He was still trying to make it about him, still trying to balance the blame. But I didn't owe him forgiveness. Not anymore. I folded the letter and placed it in the trash. Then I washed my hands, dusted the counter, and got back to work. Because my story wasn't about him anymore. The bakery kept growing. Customers started coming from nearby towns. Some came just to meet the woman behind Sweet Rise. A few local journalists asked to interview me. The first time I saw my name in print, Anna Carter, owner of Sweet Rise Bakery, I cried. It wasn't pride alone, it was disbelief. For years, I had believed I was invisible, forgettable, small. But there it was, my name, printed for the world to see. One afternoon, a young woman came into the shop. She looked nervous, clutching a small notebook. "Hi," she said softly. "Are you Anna, the owner?" "Yes," I smiled. "How can I help you?" She hesitated. I just wanted to say your story inspired me. I read about you in the newspaper. I'm stuck in a job I hate and I've been scared to quit. But then I saw what you did. And I thought maybe I could change my life too. Her words hit me like sunlight. I felt something warm spread through my chest. I reached out and took her hand. You can, I said. You just have to start. Even small steps matter. Don't wait for permission to live your life. She smiled through tears, and I watched her leave the shop with her head held a little higher. That moment stayed with me long after she left. It reminded me of the woman I used to be, the one who sat in silence, waiting for someone else to give her worth. Now, I was giving that power to others. Life became busy, but it was a beautiful kind of busy. I hired 2 young assistants, both eager to learn. We laughed together while baking, sang along to the radio, and decorated cakes until late at night. Sometimes customers would compliment me directly. You have a gift, they'd say. But what they didn't know was that my real gift wasn't baking, it was resilience. It was learning to turn pain into purpose. About a year after opening, Sweet Rise was invited to participate in a local food fair. It was the biggest event of the season, with restaurants, cafes, and chefs from all over the city. At first, I hesitated. I'm not ready, I told Mrs. Lane. I'm just a small shop. She looked at me with that knowing smile of hers. You're not small, Anna, you're mighty. So I entered. The morning of the fair, I set up my booth with trembling hands. I displayed loaves of bread, pastries, cakes, and little cards with handwritten quotes about hope and new beginnings. People loved it. They lined up, bought everything, asked about the meaning behind the quotes. And when the judges came by, one of them, a famous chef, took a bite of my cinnamon bread and smiled. This tastes like home, he said, like someone who's been through something but still believes in sweetness. I blinked back tears. That's exactly what it is. When they announced the winners later that day, Sweet Rise Bakery took first place. The crowd clapped and I stood there holding the trophy, heart pounding, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't just winning an award. I was reclaiming my worth. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the bakery. The lights were dim, the shelves empty. I held the trophy in my hands, running my fingers along the smooth surface. And I whispered to myself, you did it. But more than that, I whispered, you're free. In the weeks that followed, I received calls from catering companies, wedding planners, even a few local cafes that wanted to sell my pastries. My little bakery was becoming something bigger. But through it all, I stayed grounded. I still woke up before dawn, still kneaded the dough myself, still greeted every customer with the same warmth I had on my very first day. Because I knew what it felt like to lose everything, and I never wanted to forget the woman who had started with nothing but courage. One Sunday morning, as I was opening the shop, I saw a familiar figure standing across the street. It was him. Mark. He looked different, older, tired, maybe even lonely. For a moment our eyes met. My heart didn't race. It did ache, it just stayed calm. He crossed the street slowly and stopped at the window, looking at the sign. Sweet Rise Bakery, he murmured. So this is yours. I nodded. Yes, it is. He looked at me for a long time. You look happy, he said finally. I am. A faint smile touched his lips. You've changed. No, I said softly. I just stopped letting you define me. He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize again, maybe to ask something, but I didn't need to hear it. Take care, Mark, I said, and with that I turned and went back inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, and I felt a deep sense of peace settle in my chest. That was closure, not the kind that comes from words, but the kind that comes from finally letting go. That evening, I stood outside as the sun set behind the city. The sky was streaked with pink and gold. I could see the reflection of my bakery in the glass window, the lights glowing warm, people laughing inside. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. My story wasn't about loss. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about rising. About finding strength in pain. About turning humiliation into purpose. About becoming someone I could finally be proud of. I looked up at the sky, my eyes stinging with tears, and whispered. Once, I was the woman they laughed at. Now, I'm the woman who built her own world. And I smiled because I knew. This was only the beginning. Success has a strange way of bringing the past back to your door. You think you've closed it forever, but somehow, when you're finally happy, the ghosts knock again. By the second year of Sweet Rise Bakery, things had blossomed beyond what I ever imagined. We had a second branch opening soon, a loyal following, and even a few features in lifestyle magazines. I was busier than ever, but I didn't mind. Every sunrise felt like a victory. Then one morning, I received an invitation that changed everything. It was a formal cream-colored envelope, thick and embossed with gold. At first, I thought it was a wedding invite from one of my customers, but when I opened it, my heart skipped. You are cordially invited to the annual business charity gala, hosted by Carter Enterprises. Carter Enterprises. His company. Marks. I stared at the invitation for a long time, my pulse quickening. Why now? Why me? Then I noticed a note attached. Your bakery will be featured among local success stories this year. Congratulations, Anna. My name. Printed on paper from his world. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Pride, fear, anger, maybe all three. It was ironic, really. 2 years ago, I was the woman he joked about selling for $1. Now, his company wanted to showcase me as a symbol of success. I almost laughed. Part of me wanted to throw the invitation away, but another part whispered no, go. Not for revenge. Not for him. But for closure. I wanted to walk into that world again, not as his wife, but as the woman who rose from the ashes he left behind. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my simple black dress. It wasn't expensive or loud, but it made me feel powerful. My hair was pinned up, my makeup soft but confident. I looked at my reflection and saw a woman I barely recognized, strong, calm, unshakable. Ready? Mrs. Lane asked from behind me. She had insisted on coming as my guest. I nodded, smiling nervously, as ready as I'll ever be. Then let's show them who you are. The ballroom was filled with glittering lights, chandeliers that sparkled like stars. Elegant people in tuxedos and gowns mingled, champagne glasses in hand. Laughter floated through the air. It was the kind of world I used to pretend to belong to, the world he ruled so easily. As we entered, a few people turned and smiled. Some recognized me from the newspaper articles, others from my bakery. Ah, Sweet Rise, my wife loves your pastries, one man said cheerfully, shaking my hand. I smiled, grateful, and tried to stay composed. But deep inside, I could feel the tension building. Because somewhere in that room, he was here. It didn't take long to find him. He stood near the stage, talking to a group of investors. His suit was sharp, his posture confident, just as I remembered. But when his eyes met mine across the room, the air seemed to stop. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled, hesitant, almost disbelieving. He excused himself from the group and walked toward me. Anna, he said softly, I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I replied. He looked at me with something that resembled pride. You look incredible. Thank you, I said simply. He paused. So you're one of the honorees tonight. Sweet Rise Bakery, right? I nodded. That's right. He laughed lightly, shaking his head. I can't believe it. You really did it. There was a strange sadness in his voice, almost regret, but I didn't let it pull me in. Yes, I said calmly, I did. Later, when the host took the stage, I listened as they announced, tonight, we celebrate local entrepreneurs who have made an impact in our community. One of them turned her pain into purpose, Anna Carter, founder of Sweet Rise Bakery. Applause filled the room. I stood, walked up to the stage, and accepted the award. The spotlight was warm against my skin. My heart pounded, but I felt grounded, rooted in who I'd become. Thank you, I began, my voice clear but steady. When I started my bakery, I had nothing but courage and a dream. There were times I felt small, invisible, even broken. But I learned something along the way, that sometimes the most painful endings are just beginnings in disguise. The room was silent now, listening. I stand here not as someone who had it easy, I continued, but as someone who chose to rise when it would have been easier to stay down. Every loaf I bake is a reminder that we can start over, that strength grows in silence, and that no one has the right to define our worth. Applause thundered again, and as I stepped down, my eyes met his. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. His eyes glistened, not with arrogance but something else. Maybe guilt, maybe understanding. After the ceremony, he approached me again. "Your speech," he began quietly. "It was powerful, you've changed so much." "I had to," I said simply. He hesitated. "I think about that night sometimes, about what I said. I was cruel, I know that now. You didn't deserve it." I nodded slowly. "You're right, I didn't." He sighed. "You were the best thing I ever had, Anna, and I threw it away." There was a time when those words would have made me cry, but now they only made me feel peace. I looked at him, not with hate, but with clarity. "You didn't throw me away, Mark. You threw away the woman who believed in you, and that woman doesn't exist anymore." He blinked, caught off guard by my calm. I smiled gently. "I wish you well, truly, but I've moved on. My life isn't about you anymore." Then I turned and walked away before he could say another word. Outside, the air was crisp, the city lights glittering like 1,000 tiny stars. I stood for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over me. Mrs. Lane joined me, her arm brushing mine. "You handled that beautifully," she said. I smiled. It wasn't about handling him, it was about honoring myself. She squeezed my hand. "And you did that, dear, you truly did." Later that night, when I got home, I sat by the window of my small apartment above the bakery. I looked out at the quiet street below, at the shop sign glowing softly in the dark. It hit me how far I'd come, from the woman who once trembled under cruel laughter to the woman who stood on a stage and spoke her truth. For years, I thought my story ended at that dinner party, but it hadn't ended, it had just begun there. The humiliation that once felt like the end of my life had become the spark that lit my freedom. I took my notebook from the drawer, the same one that had carried all my dreams, and flipped to the last page. In neat handwriting, I wrote, "They said I was boring. They said I was weak. But I turned their mockery into my strength. I am not the woman they laughed at anymore. I am the woman who rose." As I closed the notebook, I smiled. The past no longer haunted me. It had shaped me, yes, but it no longer owned me. For the first time in my life, I felt complete. Not because I had succeeded. Not because others admired me. But because I had learned to love the woman I became after everything fell apart. That night, I stood on the balcony and whispered into the wind, "You did it, Anna." No audience, no applause, just the quiet night and my steady heartbeat. And in that silence, I finally understood. I hadn't just rebuilt my life. I had rewritten it. It's strange how peace feels when you've never truly known it before. For the longest time, I thought peace meant quiet, no shouting, no conflict, no chaos. But real peace, I've learned, isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of purpose. And now, every morning when I unlock the doors of Sweet Rise Bakery, I feel it, the kind of calm that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. The smell of warm bread fills the air, the sound of laughter from my staff rings through the shop, and sunlight pours through the big front windows. It feels like home, not a perfect home, but one I built with my own 2 hands. Sometimes, I pause behind the counter and look around, still amazed at how far I've come. There was a time when I was afraid of my own reflection. Now, I meet my own eyes with pride. It's been 3 years since that night. 3 years since I walked away from the woman I used to be, the one who stayed silent, the one who believed love meant endurance. My life looks nothing like it did back then, and yet, somehow, it feels exactly as it was always meant to be. We've opened 2 new branches now, one in the city, one by the beach. Each one carries the same simple message written on the wall in my handwriting. Rise anyway. It's more than a slogan, it's my story. People often ask me how I did it. "How did you find the courage to start over?" they say. I smile because the truth is, I didn't find courage. Courage found me. It found me in the silence, after humiliation. It found me in the loneliness of a tiny rented room. It found me in the smell of freshly baked bread and the warmth of a stranger's kindness. It found me when I realized I didn't have to wait for anyone to save me. I could save myself. I still remember the first interview I gave after Sweet Rise became known. The reporter was young and enthusiastic, her notebook already half filled with scribbles. "Your story is so inspiring," she said. "If you could say one thing to women who feel stuck or invisible, what would it be?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "I'd tell them," I said, "that pain doesn't mean the end. Sometimes it's the invitation to begin again. You don't need someone's permission to be powerful. You just need to believe you deserve more." She smiled and said softly, "You really did rise." And I laughed. Yes, but not just from pain, from fear, from silence, from who I was. On weekends, I often host small workshops at the bakery. Not about baking, but about rebuilding. Women come in with quiet eyes and tired smiles. Some are fresh out of breakups, others are widows, a few are just lost. They sit in a circle, sipping coffee, sharing stories. And I tell them mine, not the glossy, successful version, but the raw one. The version where I was broken and scared and humiliated in a room full of laughter. I watch their faces soften as they listen. Some cry, some nod silently. Because they see themselves in me. And when the session ends, I always tell them the same thing. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become after. One day, a young girl named Clara came to one of those sessions. She couldn't have been more than 22. She'd been in a controlling relationship, scared to leave, unsure of her worth. At the end of the session, she came up to me, trembling. "I don't think I can start over," she said. "I'm not strong like you." I took her hands in mine. "Neither was I told her. "Strength doesn't show up all at once. It grows every time you refuse to stay broken." A few months later, she came back smiling. She left him. She had started a small online store selling handmade candles. She hugged me and whispered, "I rose." I cried that day. Because that's what it's all about. Not fame, not money, not even success. It's about reminding others that they can rise too. Sometimes I still see Mark. Not often, but life has a way of crossing paths with old ghosts when you least expect it. The last time was at a charity event last spring. He was there with his new partner. I was there to donate part of the bakery's earnings to a women's shelter. When he saw me, he smiled politely and nodded. I nodded back. There was no anger left, no bitterness, just distance. After the event, he approached me briefly. "You've done well for yourself, Anna," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "I have." He hesitated, then said, "You look happy." "I am," I said simply. He gave a small smile, the kind that comes with acceptance, and walked away. And just like that, a chapter closed forever. That night, I went home and stood on my balcony, looking up at the stars. The wind was cool, carrying the faint scent of sugar and cinnamon from the bakery below. For a long time, I just stood there, remembering everything. The girl who believed she was too boring to be loved. The woman who was auctioned off for a laugh. The one who walked away with trembling hands and a suitcase full of dreams. And the one standing here now, whole, unbroken, free. It's strange. Sometimes the people who try to destroy you are the same ones who end up building your strength. He wanted to make me small, but he made me unstoppable. Now, when I look back, I don't see that dinner as the night my life ended. I see it as the night my real story began. Because that was the moment I decided to stop surviving and start living. I learned that humiliation doesn't define you, how you respond to it does. That pain is not a curse, it's a teacher. And that losing everything you thought you needed can sometimes lead you to everything you truly deserve. Every day, before I close the bakery, I turn off the lights and stand for a moment in the soft glow of the evening. The air smells like vanilla and warmth, and I whisper the same words to myself, words that have become a promise. You are enough, you always were. Once, my husband introduced me to the world as his boring wife. Now, the world knows me as the woman who built Sweet Rise Bakery. But more than that, I know myself as the woman who refused to stay small. If I could go back and speak to the woman I was that night at the dinner, I would tell her this. One day, you'll thank him, not because he was kind, but because he pushed you toward your strength. One day, you'll wake up and realize that the pain that broke you also built you. And one day, you'll look in the mirror and see not the woman who was laughed at, but the woman who made them watch her rise. And now, when people ask me what keeps me going, I tell them, it's not revenge, it's gratitude. Gratitude for the lesson. Gratitude for the strength I never knew I had. Gratitude for the second chance I gave myself. The world will always have people who try to belittle you, who mistake your kindness for weakness. But once you know your worth, no one can sell it for $1 again. I close my notebook one final time, the same one that carried my dreams when I had nothing else. On the last page, I write, I was once their joke. Now I am my own miracle. And as I switch off the lights and lock the door of my bakery, the sign glows softly behind me. Sweet Rise, a symbol of who I am. A reminder of who I'll never be again. I step into the cool night air, my heart light, my head high. Because this is what it means to rise.